Dore is an internationally acclaimed arts writer. She's written a number of books, including on Isamu Noguchi, David Rankin. She's written 2 on David Rankin, including the one in our catalogue. She's also written on Mark Rothko, which is about Rothko, and also the New York School of Cultural Awakening. They are significant writings on art. And it's significant for us that Dore is here this afternoon. She's also a fantastic teacher. She's one of 2 professors at the Cooper Union University in New York. It's great to have you here. Ladies and gentlemen, Dore Ashton.
It's a privilege to be here, and especially to be talking to you in the presence of the paintings, which are my chief concern. And there are critics who are very keen to see the artist's work, as they now say, in context. Well, I'm going to urge you to get rid of that idea. It's okay, but quite often an artist's work goes against the context. There have been many artists in the history of art who definitely were not in context and who ignored the quotidian, who sometimes the work, even to them, seems to spring from sources that are unbeknown even to them, unbeknownst to them. That, I say sometimes, but that's quite often the case. You should bear that in mind, that in the case of many artists, I won't speak for David Rankin, you can ask him yourself in the question period, but many artists, what they deeply desire is to spring free from their self and their perceived limitations. I could ask also, there's a very marvelous French writer who wrote in the catalogue who's sitting here too, Frédéric Jeannet. Is that true of writers too, isn't it? Yeah, I think so. So, in the case of a painter, and I'm speaking about this painter, David Rankin, it's a fusion of imagination and act that could never precisely be analyzed. The poet, the French poet, Paul Valéry, he said, the painter takes his body with him. And many people have built on that, including the great French philosopher, Maurice Merleau-Ponty. He found that in Valéry, and he built a whole book about it. And any painter would confirm it. A painter is not exactly like a writer. A writer doesn't necessarily have to take his body with him, but a painter does. And that's something you have to bear in mind, because understanding painting has a lot to do with your fingertips, how you can relate to a texture. This artist, for instance, is extremely sensitive to the matter, the point at which he enters into a dialogue with whatever thing he is painting on. Let's say, if it's linen, which as you know has a fine grain, and he has worked on linen. If it's canvas, which is most often has a very pronounced grain. If it's just rags, as I think David once told me that he tried working just with rags that he found in the market somewhere, I don't remember where. Here in Australia, right, David?
Right.
Yeah. A painter is very sensitive to the materials he's using. Not only the grounding, the canvas or the rags or whatever, but what texture the paint has, how a brush feels in his hand. Like any other artisan, a painter is part artisan, and even a carpenter, an ordinary carpenter, if you see him shopping, you go to a hardware store and you see a carpenter shopping for a hammer, you see they pick it up. Oh, I shouldn't do that, that's my broken arm. They pick it up, they feel the weight, how it fits into their hand, and that's the craftsman's side which exists in painting, in my opinion, in all the arts, that we tend to neglect and not care to know enough about, not to educate ourselves about. So I urge you to think about that. So there is this mysterious transaction between the work and the eye that perceives it, beginning with the painter, who himself is not his work, he's outside. And as I often felt, a work of art, a painting, we don't really know precisely where it is. We stand in front of it. Where is it? Is it on the wall? No, I think it's between us and the wall. It hovers. A good work of art hovers, which is why you have an after image of a good work of art. And I think that the bodily actions that the painter undertakes do call forth bodily reactions in us. So, louder? Yeah.
Closer to the mic, thanks, Dore.
Closer to the mic, okay. Hello, Mike.
Best offer you've had for a while.
Yeah, right. Say that again. Now, before I specifically address this man, David Rankin's life's work to date, I want to say that in my case, and tell you who I am, in our newspapers in the United States, we have little parentheses. Sometimes the reporter will write, self-disclosure, I know this man. So this is a self-disclosure about how I respond to this man's works of art. And I wanted to point out that what I want in painting, what I seek in painting always, is to be moved. In my country, they call me an art critic. It's a phrase I don't like at all. And often when I speak like this to audiences, there's always a question period, and invariably somebody says, by what criteria do you judge a painting? Really, almost always there's one who's going to ask that question. And then I always answer the same thing. I don't judge a painting. In order for you to judge a painting, there has to be a body of law. The judge works with a body of law. There's no body of law governing the arts. And what we have to rely on is unfortunately a very vague way of perception, which I'll call intelligence plus intuition. No two artistic experiences are identical. So, having said that, and telling you where I live, and you can disagree with me in very few minutes, I'm not going to give a long lecture, but I'd be glad to have a conversation with you about any of these things. When I look at the body of work from which this exhibition has been selected, and don't forget, when you make an exhibition, you don't always get what you want. There are people, collectors, for instance, who can't bear to part with their paintings. And so it's difficult to make an exhibition like this. And I think this museum has done a great thing in doing it. I look at work like this, and I look for the threads, you might say, that are woven together from all of those things, all of those experiences. And I look to see if there's something, for want of a better phrase, I'll say, a handwriting that I can recognize. I believe that this exhibition, if you look at it carefully, it does reveal the artist's handwriting. It really is an idiosyncratic handwriting that you can read from the very beginning, from his earliest work when the guy was a kid, 21, 20, something like that. The earliest work here, I think, is, do you know, David? Is that 21?
Probably 20, 21.
Yeah, amazing, amazing. From that moment on, if you read carefully, you'll see that there's something, I don't know what we would call it, but it's his, and it threads through the work. And no matter how many new experiences he undertakes, and he does, he's a courageous artist in that respect. I think he once said to me, I want to make the bravest painting I can, which is a very nice thing. And he did. So here I would say the nature of his experience. I mean, you of course can be very proud because he is Australian painter, right? To me, he's a universal painter. I'm against nationalism. However, I know that there are differences between where I grew up and where he grew up. And since painters live through their eyes very much so, what he saw from the day he opened his eyes would factor into what he paints. But what he saw with his mind's eye is probably a lot more important. And he was, as you would say, a child of the bush. He was provincial. And therefore, he had one great advantage. If he wanted to know what the world was like, he had to find out on his own, and he did, amazingly. Because he has what I'd call native intelligence. I wish there were more of that in the world these days. It's more honest and usually more vigorous. He was aware from an early age, it seems to me, that he was in, as you call it, the outback. We have an outback too in the United States, but we don't call it that. I hate to tell you what I call it. Well, never mind. And so, according to many conversations I had with David, and as you know, I actually wrote a book about David, so I had a lot of conversations about his youth with him. And usually when you do that, when you write a book which is quasi-biographical, if you're an experienced reporter, as I am, you talk and talk and talk and listen and listen and listen till you hear certain things repeated. Then you know how important they were. There were a lot of things in our conversations which hinted at how this man educated himself, with the help of others, of course, a teacher here, a person there, a painter here. But there were things that he sought out. And as I remember, some teacher told him about, or gave him a book, maybe, about Leonardo da Vinci, which I don't think entered too much into his formation as an artist. But another teacher gave him a book, or he got a book, I can't remember, the history of Buddhism, David, was given to you by, or you found it?
No, it was given to me by a teacher when I was 15. It was the history of Buddhism by an English writer called Christmas Humphrey.
Christmas Humphrey, how nice. That was a good Christmas present. Which, looking back, standing where I stand now in 2005, looking back, I could say rather glibly, that was for him a formative experience because his temperament was attuned really very closely to the point of view of existence which Buddhism represents. And most particularly, from my point of view, this is my point of view, he seemed to understand instinctively the nature of Zen Buddhism, which is quite different from ordinary Buddhism. And in Zen, there are many places you can go if you're an artist. And you probably know some of the greatest Chinese, Chan, that is, painters, and some of the greatest Japanese painters, Zen painters, were Zen Buddhists. And there must be a reason for that, and poets as well. So he had already, by the age of 21, which is when he came to Sydney, that was in 1967, I think, he had already begun his quest, and it goes on. In fact, just last year we had a long conversation about a Japanese poet called Issa, and I think I can paraphrase the little haiku that we were talking about.